This content is brought to you by Uphold, which makes crypto investing easy. I've been a user of Uphold since 2017. They're one of my go-to exchanges. You can buy, sell, and trade cryptocurrencies on Uphold. You can also trade precious metals and equities. They have 10 plus million users, 250 plus cryptocurrencies, and they're available in 150 countries. As with all exchanges, you can buy and sell on them, but I highly recommend you custody your own crypto, not your keys, not your coins. If you'd like to learn more about Uphold, please visit the link in the description. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Ron Hammond of the Blockchain Association. Ron, great to have you on this Friday morning.
Always great to be on. I really appreciate you having me again.
Well, Ron, lots of questions for you. You're the man connected in DC. So first, I want to start with the Hinman emails and that were released on Tuesday. And this is Bill Hinman, of course, who formerly was at the SEC. What impact is that having in DC and on the industry as far as Gary Gensler's credibility?
So, of course, Bill Hinman was during the Jay Clayton era. So that's when the Republicans had control of the administration. So now that we've seen a change and reversal here, at least the parties in control of the SEC, it's still a lot going out, actually, it looks like. I mean, we're still sifting through the Hinman emails themselves. I know Ripple put out a statement, both from their GC Stu Alderati as well as Brad Garlinghouse. And so I think we're still trying to see if that's going to help the court case out here. I've heard different things where some lawyers say, hey, look, this is actually going to really bolster their case. I've heard others say it's a nothing burger. But regardless of the situation, I think this showcases that the court cases are going to take a long time to process. I mean, look at the Coinbase situation right now. Look at Binance as well. And the plenty of other ones like Grayscale, for example, too. These take years to build, as well as years to go through the whole process here. And that's not even including the appeal process. And so I know a lot of folks are saying, hey, Congress moves pretty slow, but the courts move just as slow, if not slower. That's the political process we have here in the United States, for better or for worse. But I think we're making some progress in the Ripple case. It looks like we're going to see at least a decision in both Ripple and Grayscale potentially sometime this year. And I think the thing to say is the SEC's track record of winning every single crypto court case that they have been saying for quite some time and been really saying from the rooftops recently, that record might be changed pretty soon. So again, it depends. If some folks think Grayscale is a better chance, some folks say Ripple. It's kind of mixed here in DC. But regardless, I think the court cases are going to be a kink in the armor for the SEC. But at the same time, it's going to show that there's still a lot more to go if there's an appeal process in both those cases.
For sure. And I feel like you're saying it's a process. And as things are revealed, it seems like the SEC is not in a good spot. That doesn't mean that they can't win, but I think they're losing a lot of credibility. It seems like people are like, there's a lot of legal experts weighing in on these Hinman emails. A lot of people are just seeing things some would call conspiracy theories back in the day are being revealed. And it's pretty fascinating. And some were alluding that Gary Gensler's big push against Coinbase and Binance just last week was as a result of these things that were about to be released.
Yeah, unclear on that front. I think there's actually more political timing with the Coinbase and Binance lawsuits in reference to Congress. Actually, it's specifically timed, at least in the Coinbase situation. I highlighted this in the Twitter thread I did earlier this week. But the Coinbase lawsuit came 1 hour before Coinbase's chief legal officer was testifying in the House Agriculture Committee about how the CFTC needs to play more of a role in in regulation of digital assets. That is a direct strike at the SEC. Even though it's not a zero-sum game, it's not like the CFTC is going to take over the SEC's jurisdiction. We're just giving the CFTC in the legislation that McHenry and Thompson proposed, the lead Republicans, that the CFTC should have spot market regulation. And it's very clearly defined there in that legislation proposal on market structure. And to have that suspicious timing, at least with Coinbase, was definitely something, at least in the political spheres, we saw as coordinated for sure. And again, that's totally legally allowed. They're allowed to release the documents whenever they want to, or release the lawsuits. But it was very curious timing. And Coinbase especially has been really poking the bear when it comes to the SEC. Whether it be both on the legislative front, on the lobbying front, but also on the public campaign front too. Brian Armstrong was openly blasting the SEC for not meeting with him a couple months ago. So I think this was a way for the SEC to say, see, you know what, you poke the bear, we're going to come after you. But the timing was definitely something that a lot of folks saying, you are a securities regulator. You are acting very political, and actually reminds me lastly of Richie Torres, the Bronx Democrat, who's been very critical of the Democrat administration of the SEC. He said in an interview last year, Gary Gensler is more a regulator acting as a politician, and that's candidly, it looks more and more like that each time there's an enforcement action in the crypto space.
For sure. Now, also on Tuesday, we had a hearing led by Patrick McHenry. That was kind of like a last minute hearing that was put on the books. Tell us about that and what were some of the main takeaways?
So this year, actually, I was in the room itself. I love going to these hearings. It went so close to to my apartment, but it was a full committee hearing. So all of the Financial Services Committee was there. And so we had Jeremy Allaire from Circle, Coy Garrison with Steptoe, who was Hester Peirce's brainchild staffer behind the Safe Harbor proposal. So I worked with him a lot back in my time on Capitol Hill. We saw Prometheum there as well. We saw Ava Lab CEO, and then we saw NFA, the National Futures Association. So that covers more the CFTC spot market angle. But it was really weird for Prometheum. Again, let's look at the timing here as well. We talked about SEC timing. They were given that approval for the special broker dealer. Then that was proposed back in 2020. 3 years later, they get the approval here, and just a few weeks later, there's Coinbase and Binance lawsuits, and it seems like the SEC is giving a choice: comply, and you get this exemption here, or approval. Don't comply, and you're going to be subject to an enforcement action. And so he's trying to give the industry a choice. It looks like here. But the problem is that he went with a firm that had ties to China, and that's where a lot of Republicans were hitting on. But also, too, there was no clarity in terms of what assets they could trade. They can't, as we saw Representative Mike Flood from Nebraska, they can't trade Bitcoin, they can't trade Ethereum.
Yeah.
So what do they trade? And
what are you doing here?
It's more suspect.
Yeah. Yeah, very, very strange. And a lot of people are now investigating Prometheum and their CEO, and pulling up a lot of videos and things like that. It's very strange. And also, I think some were saying this license that they got from the SEC recently was what Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX were about to get when they were meeting with the SEC until things collapsed. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but what are your thoughts on that?
We were hearing similar rumors that there was the approach that the SEC was going to give. Hey, you comply. In the rumors, and again, I want to say this again, these are rumors, there's nothing substantial here, but the rumors we were hearing back in 2022 where FTX is going to get a pass, or at least they're going to get approved for an exemption, and then Coinbase is going to get a lawsuit. And the idea, again, here's what you can do: you talk to the SEC, here's what happens when you go against us, or in their case, don't comply with the law. And so that choice dynamic fell all apart when the FTX is falling apart as well. So again, I want to stress, these are just rumors here, but it does seem very much like the playbook that we're seeing at the SEC, a very political SEC as well. But I will say, to your point earlier as well, it seems like the public narrative really is shifting towards pro crypto industry at the moment. We're seeing that both on Capitol Hill. We're seeing Democrats actually getting peeled off one by one, saying, actually, I think this is a little odd, to say the least. Even if they don't believe in crypto, they still are saying, I don't think the SEC's line saying that there's no need for legislation makes sense, because we're seeing all these collapses. We're all seeing all these consumers harmed. And also, we've been hearing from witnesses, the rules are not clear. We've been hearing that over and over and over again, and it doesn't seem like it's clear. And so, at least from the Capitol Hill perspective, I feel like we're getting more and more momentum. But also in the public forum, I'm seeing a lot more folks being a lot more sympathetic to the crypto industry than they were just last year. So again, we still have a long ways to go. We still have a lot of trust to rebuild with the grand population here in the United States after FTX and several other issues in 2022. But there has been a noticeable shift here in DC the past 2 weeks in terms of just public opinion.
That's great to hear, and especially among the Democrats, because I know, look, politics is politics, right? And they may back Gary Gensler because he's a Democrat appointed chair. And I know from the Biden administration, I don't know how much they're paying attention to what he's doing, Gary Gensler's doing, but at least members of Congress are seeing something's not right here. Something smells fishy.
Yeah, well, to your point, Janet Yellen was actually in that same exact committee room just a couple hours before that crypto hearing. And she even said, first Senator French Hill, the member from Arkansas who's leading the digital asset subcommittee for the Republicans, he asked her, do we need legislation to regulate crypto? She says, yes, stable coins, not securities, the role of spot markets, literally everything that's being worked on right now in Congress. And that is in direct contrast to Gary Gensler, who just said in April, I don't need legislation. Again, a pivot from his 2021 position. And so that, again, even within his own ranks, his own administration is against his point of view. And so I think it showcases, A, he's becoming more and more isolated and alone, but also B, it seemed like the Treasury Department, which we know in the past for stablecoins, has been working with both sides of the aisle to get this done. They seem a lot more committed to actually moving legislation forward, creating a clear framework. So again, I wanted to say, when folks say it's just all the Democrats, it's not. It's usually just one man leading the SEC, and he has a lot of power. So I really wanted to make sure we say that this is still a bipartisan issue, and that we have a lot of friendly Democrats in our camp.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember talking to Congressman Darren Soto about this, and I said, look, I don't necessarily think there's less Democrats, but rather there's maybe one like Elizabeth Warren whose voice is so loud it overshadows what the Democrats who are sensible and who are pro crypto. I feel there's a bit of that, right? From an optics standpoint, all you see is Elizabeth Warren and Brad Sherman versus, hey, Richie Torres, Darren Soto, and all these other great guys.
It's 100% right. You know, the running joke in the Senate Banking Committee is that there are almost 20 members on that committee, maybe a little more, and they can all ask a question at a hearing, no matter what the topic is. But the media is usually going to cover one member, and that's Elizabeth Warren, because she does a good job, to her credit, of creating a stage, building a presence, and she's built a brand of going after large financial institutions and banks and what have you. But that's kind of the unfortunate part, is that there's the folks in Congress, and especially folks in DC, who are the yellers, or the ones who want to get media attention. And then they're the ones who don't get as much glamorized attention, but they're the ones working hard behind the scenes. And that's politics. And I think I would rather have the folks who are working hard here, and a lot of those are in the crypto camp, of coming up with a regulatory framework that's bipartisan, rather than just blasting everything and saying we don't need legislation, or this is all a scam, or we should just let this industry die off. And that's how the approach I think that serious policymakers are having.
Now, Patrick McHenry and I think Bill Huizenga as well, there are two SEC focused hearings next week. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, so it's in the early formation stages, but like I said, to your point, it is the next week. It's really fast. McHenry is really moving along his timeline to get as much of his priorities attention to while we're early in this Congress, because once the presidential election cycle comes in 2024, everything gets kind of kicked to the wayside. It's all about the presidential election in DC. So he knows that. He's a smart operator, and that's why we're having a lot of SEC focused hearings. And so Bill Huizenga, the representative from Michigan, he's going to be leading an oversight of the entire SEC. The witnesses haven't been announced yet, but I imagine we'll probably have some folks from the industry. I'm sure crypto will definitely be coming up a lot. At the same time, though, we're going to have another one over the Division of Trading and Markets, and that's a pretty important division, especially when it comes to exchange regulation. What do crypto exchanges need to comply with? And so we will see how those hearings go up. But I think this showcases that if you can't go over Gensler, every month, which that's not physically possible for Congress to bring him in every single month, let's go make sure we go after the organization itself, and making sure that A, there's clear rules, but B, make sure that everything is up to snuff here, because sometimes there's things that stink at the SEC, and the Republicans want to get to the bottom of that. So we'll see what happens there, but these are pretty new developments.
Yeah, I'm pleasantly surprised, and the pace. And all of a sudden, these are popping up, which is good. I think more dialogue is needed to get the word out about what's happening here from the industry. But yesterday, we had some very big news, which I don't think anybody saw coming, given the environment we were in, right? The price is in a downtrend, a lot of enforcement actions, a lot of fear in the market. All of a sudden, BlackRock says, we're going to file for a Bitcoin ETF. I'm sure people are still digesting that news. What are your thoughts on that? That's pretty big.
It's a big move. And I think we're seeing more and more institutional money saying, hey, look, this is not going away. This is a really exciting space. And ironically, actually, one of the SEC's folks on the legal counsel side, who I worked with a lot when I was a Hill staffer, he's now over at BlackRock and leading a lot of their public policy opinions. So he's been really a great guy to work with, both in my capacity now at the Wall Street Association, but also in my previous life in politics. But It's good to see that at least BlackRock really putting their name on it, and also them being loud about it too. Them being very vocal about, hey, look, we are committed to this space. The grayscale case is going on right now, but you know what? We were committed to putting some more institutional money into the space. When a lot of folks just a couple weeks ago were saying, I think crypto is going to die off. I think this industry is not going to exist. And seeing more institutional firms saying, no, that's completely false is a really good bolster of confidence.
Yeah, the timing is interesting, and I know there was another news I was waiting to hear, and there was talks of Nasdaq launching their crypto custody service by the end of Q2. So I'm hoping that's around the corner too, because I think these big institutions setting up shop could maybe help in the dialogue that's happening with Congress, and the need for, we got to get this going, right? It's not just small startups in crypto. There's big firms that are getting involved.
Yeah, and I want to highlight this too, is that when I worked on Capitol Hill, working on crypto legislation, the Token Taxonomy Act in particular, I got comments from all over the industry, including NASDAQ, including BlackRock, but also firms like Coinbase, consumer groups, and plenty of others. But it was weird at the time. Again, we're talking 2017, 2018, when NASDAQ expressed such a high interest in this space. I mean, they were front and center. I had several meetings with them, and again, and plenty of other folks, but seeing their commitment. And then I hear the comments from Prometheum's CEO the other day saying, the industry right now, when it comes to regulatory approval, it's a crawl, walk, run approach. And that goes to the whole regulatory system we have here in the United States, which is you don't want to be first, because it seems like if you're the first person, you're going to get dinged. The SEC is going to come after you because you're in violation of the laws. And so now that we see the institutional firms who are just waiting for these folks to get dinged first, then they come in after the fact. There's a lot of folks being like, that's paving the way for only institution to dominate this space. I push back a little bit there, but I think it showcases also the United States. It's just A, the rules are not clear, but B, this whole idea that you have to crawl to be in the space is really concerning. And that's why we're seeing a lot of the innovation flight go elsewhere, because they know that they can, what they can and can't do in these other jurisdictions. We don't have that here in the United States. So I think that's a really, it showcases that we need to make sure we have the rules in place, and Congress is leading that effort right now. But the SEC seems to be gung-ho of keeping the regulation by enforcement status quo. So our hope is Congress can move this. And again, that takes a lot of bipartisan support.
I don't know if you can answer this, and if it's something that's being discussed in DC among regulators and even members of Congress. There's a big shift, it seems like, or a total 180 from China and Hong Kong on crypto. We're seeing reports of them putting out a white paper. They open up retail trading to retail investors. I should say, open up trading to retail investors. And then they're opening up banking services. They're inviting crypto companies to come. What are your thoughts on that? And given that, there's always this macro geopolitical thing, China and all that in the US, is there any discussions around that?
Well, that's what the Prometheum witness was so curious, because there was a heavy, it was a 20% investment from a Chinese firm. And that's pretty much like a curse word here on Capitol Hill. China is the #1 topic, both Republicans and Democrats. If there was any ties to China for any businesses or group or what have you, instant red flags. And that was immediately flagged in the hearing. But we saw China taking the most hostile approach to the industry just a couple of years ago. And now the reports are saying they're realizing they may have gone too far, and they want to now bring folks back into the fold. Maybe they want to improve their dominance in this sphere, in the tech sphere especially. We've been seeing that in other geopolitical senses. But it is something I want to just be careful of, folks, is that if you're engaging with the Chinese firms, the United States is going to be very hesitant to do anything positive for those companies. And we've already seen, again, Binance come under scrutiny for having potential Chinese ties. We're seeing that right now with Prometheum right now. I just be very, very careful when you're engaging with these Chinese firms, because there's a lot of folks in DC saying that shouldn't be happening in the slightest, not even just for crypto, but for any industry. So it's definitely a very contentious topic, and will be for quite some time.
Before I let you go, any updates that you can share regarding the SEC versus Binance, as well as SEC versus Coinbase?
I mean, it seems like the legal process is working its way through. It looks like the SEC has 120 days or so to respond to Coinbase's request. So we'll see how these play out in the courts. I think at the same time, legislation is actually really moving right now. This summer, these next, I'd say 6 weeks or so, we could see potentially a vote on a regulatory framework, at least in the House committees. That's one of my many steps to get to sign the law. But the process has started, and there's bill text out there for stablecoins as well as market structure. It looks like they're going to have votes potentially in July. That goes to the House floor. That's going to have a whole vote series. And then it goes over to the Senate. So I think the Senate's been a little quiet. I think we'll probably see an update on Lummis and Gillibrand's bill pretty shortly, actually, maybe as soon as potentially next week. So we'll see on that front. But Congress is really moving forward, and that's a first. Again, I've worked on crypto legislation for quite some time, but this is actually a time in the next 6 weeks we can see votes. We can see people say, my vote is here for crypto. And so that's going to be very important. Again, like I mentioned, the election is not too far off. It's a little more than a year. And so folks need to keep that in mind. If you are a crypto voter, you need to be watching and seeing, where does your member of Congress, where's your senator, where's your House member, where do they line up on these issues? We've really never had to put many of them to a vote. That's going to change pretty soon, it looks like. And if you want to keep the SEC in check, or at least you want to have a regulatory framework that businesses know what they can and can't do, be sure to watch Congress. And I think the SEC understands that, and that's why they're being a little political in their timing for a lot of these lawsuits and actions. So it's very interesting to watch. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I was very surprised by Representative McHenry and Congressman Glenn Thompson's bill that they put out, their draft. And then, like you mentioned, the Lummis Gillibrand bill as well. I know there's Securities Clarity Act from Tom Emmer, and it seems like things are ramping up. There's a lot of bills, more dialogue, more hearings. So things are looking positive. And like you said, hopefully we can get something pushed through the House, maybe then to the Senate. And man, fingers crossed that we get something before the election cycle.
I think at least in the House, we're going to definitely have a vote. It's probably going to be in 2023. The Senate does move slow, but there's enough political pressure, both from folks in the industry as well as folks in more in the general constituencies, that's going to be very, very important. So stay tuned. It's going to be really exciting. I know we talked about a lot of bills, but the market structure bill from Thompson McHenry and the stablecoin bill from French Hill, McHenry, and Waters is incredibly important. Those bills could move, and that is going to be the first time we're going to have a vote potentially on the House floor where all members of Congress get to vote on a crypto bill. Very telling. So we'll see where that goes.
Ron, always great stuff, my friend. Thank you so much.
Anytime. Happy to do it.